Hello, it's Michelle Morand, precision cancer medicine patient educator and advocate. For 14 years, I have been educating patients and helping them navigate the healthcare system, regardless of where they live in the world, to ensure that they get the most thorough diagnosis and the most accurate and beneficial therapies. But today, the reason that I'm here and what I'm so excited to share with you is an interview that I held with a pathologist by the name of Tony Magliocco when I visited his facility, Protean Diagnostics in Orlando, Florida, earlier this year. Tony is an expert in the field of precision cancer medicine from a pathology perspective, which is hard to come by these days. Most pathologists are still employed in the public healthcare or, the healthcare system exclusively. And so they prioritize being aware of and focusing on the tools that their particular cancer agency or hospital permits them to use. Tony is different. Tony, since the start of his career decades ago in Calgary and Saskatchewan in Canada, and before he moved to Florida to work as a pathologist at Moffitt. He really was an innovator from the start. He'll tell you a little bit about some of the ways that he got shut down by the healthcare system, and again, how he worked around those barriers to continuously provide more thorough information to patients and their oncologists and make sure people got the best care. In the last few years, Tony has left the hospital system and he has started his own lab, Protean Diagnostics, and we're partnering with Tony specific to our test and some other things, which I can share with you later. What I want you to learn from Tony today is the insights from an expert pathologist who has been on the front line since before precision cancer medicine was a thing, who's an incredible innovator and big picture thinking person and who has taken matters into his own hands, as we have here at Cancer Treatment Options and Management, to expedite patient access to the best possible diagnosis. Obviously, I'm very thrilled to make Tony's acquaintance. What he's going to share with you over the next hour, aside from a little bit about his background, so you can understand the wealth of knowledge that he's bringing to what he's sharing, what he's going to share is information about what's possible now and his own experience as a pathologist working in the public healthcare system about why these things are not yet part of the public healthcare system, what patients can do to get access to them in the meantime, and how they can get better treatment as a result. So I know you're going to enjoy this interview very much. Tony's a lovely human being, an incredibly knowledgeable person. This is well worth your time. Enjoy the discussion.
Hi, I'm Tony Magliocco. I was trained as a medical doctor in Canada. I grew up in southern Alberta in Lethbridge and went to the University of Lethbridge and studied biology. Got interested in medicine and completed my medical degree at the University of Alberta, being there during the Gretzky years and graduating in 1987. When I completed university, I became quite interested in pathology, and I was inspired during my medical school years about pathology, as to me, it really spoke to me as being the science of medicine. So I enjoyed both the patient care, but also really trying to understand what drove their disease. And I found that pathology was really central to making a diagnosis, to connecting with doctors, and to really getting the information that guides patient care. So I sort of fell in love with pathology, and I did my residency at Foothills Hospital at the University of Calgary, and it was an anatomic path residency, so I learned a lot about surgical pathology, tissue biopsies, even autopsies. I did a lot of forensics, and it was about 1989, I guess, when the beginning of molecular diagnostics were really starting. And I was first interested in Alzheimer's disease, and I went to a research lab, and they were looking at RNA. And I took a long elective for about 6 months, and they suggested I learn more about molecular biology. So I was lucky to have a course where I learned about DNA cloning and sequencing DNA and so on. So it was a very interesting time, and I thought about going into neuropathology, but decided that this technology would really make a difference in cancer, and decided to pursue further research in cancer. So I was very fortunate to win it was called the MRC then, Medical Research Council of Canada Fellowship, to support me to travel to Philadelphia to learn about molecular diagnostics at the Fox Chase Cancer Center, where I worked with some of the world leaders in that area for 2 years, learning about DNA sequencing. And I did a study on dark DNA and hidden sequences, viral sequences. So the human genome is full of genes that control proteins, but it's also got what we call dark DNA that we're not quite sure what it does. Some of them are viruses that are somehow embedded in our DNA that may have infected our ancestral origins that have been transmitted through the years. But these things are usually stable, but they can become unleashed and give rise to diseases like cancer and rheumatoid arthritis and other things. So interesting thing to study at that point. Came back to Canada in '91, worked at the University of Saskatchewan as an assistant professor and as a surgical pathologist, taught in medical school and opened my first lab to really understand, and I'm focused mostly on breast cancer. That was my interest, breast cancer, what drove breast cancer. And I started writing my first grants. It's kind of interesting, just as an anecdotal comment. My first grant I wrote was to do liquid biopsy on looking at HER2 and breast cancer. And so I submitted it and it was rejected. They didn't review it. They said, this is impossible. This is a waste of time. Do not pursue this. This is not even worth reviewing. And you can say, wow, look at how far we've come. But I really felt even in those days that the blood really told us everything. That if you consider how important blood is, that in a tube of blood, it's got your history, your DNA is in there. It's got what sort of vaccines you have. It's got what sort of viruses you've been exposed to. It'll even tell you what kind of supper or lunch you had. So it's a very rich fluid. And certainly if you have cancer, it'll tell you about, do you have cancer? Is the cancer progressing? How's your body responding to it? So I'm very interested in both the tissue and the blood. So worked in Saskatchewan and became really interested in inherited cancer, because Saskatchewan has the oldest cancer registry in Canada. It actually started way back, I think, in the 30s. In fact, that one of the oldest in North America. So they started registering every case of cancer in Saskatchewan way back then. And what that meant was that we had the idea, wow, we could identify all of the families who have genetic predisposition to cancer in Saskatchewan simply by reviewing the cancer registry and finding who had cancer before the age of 40. So we got a permission from the ethics to do this and reviewed all of them. We got a list of several hundred people and said, wow, these people are probably from cancer families. So we started contacting them and writing them. And I was surprised by the response, got this overwhelming positive result. In fact, there's one lady called me. She goes, oh, thank God you came, because I've been trying to tell my doctor I have hereditary cancer syndrome, and he says there's no such thing.
Wow.
We need your help.
Is this in the 90s? Where are we at right now?
We're at 94, 95. And so we really need to put a hereditary cancer program together, and Saskatchewan's the place to do it. So I actually applied to the Canadian Cancer Society, and they endorsed a program, actually funded us to get a genetic counselor to initiate a program for genetic testing in Saskatchewan. So that I was very proud of getting that off the ground. So that the importance, for those that don't know, identifying a predisposition to cancer means that these people may get cancer when they're a teenager, in their 20s or 30s. So you really want to start screening them early or educating them about the risks of cancer, and also testing their family members so that they know what the risks are. You're not doomed to get cancer if you're one of these, because you can have lifestyle modifications. You can detect cancer earlier. And in fact, there's new prophylactic medications, so they're even looking at things like green tea extracts or nutraceuticals that may be able to adjust cancer risk. So that's an interesting group.
I appreciate you adding that bit, Tony, because a lot of times, I know still in 2024, people have the idea, I don't want to know, there's nothing I can do about it. But there is actually a lot you can do if you find out you have an inherited predisposition.
No, absolutely. And it's not a death sentence by any means. So it means that you can take ownership of yourself, your family, and affect healthy behaviors and also early detection. Best way to beat cancer is early detection, totally curable in stage 0 or stage 1. So that's the whole idea of screening, get that early cancer and really get it treated at that point. The other thing is, if you do have a cancer family syndrome, the cancer you get may require a different kind of treatment. So there's different medications for these types of cancers. Things called PARP inhibitors or immune therapy may be more effective in people who have familial types of cancer. So we would focus on identifying that, and that's quite important. So that brought us to 98, and then I was lucky to move to Calgary. So I went back there with the Tom Baker, and I worked with the oncology department, so I was one of the only pathologists in oncology, worked with both the regional health system and the cancer program in Alberta. And after a couple of years, became the director of pathology for the Tom Baker, which was a really exciting position because I got to work with the clinical trials, got involved with some of the early trials with HER2 testing. So we needed to set up a program in Canada to test for HER2. And so my lab in Calgary began that testing program, and then it grew into one of the larger HER2 testing facilities in the country. And then as new technologies came along, EGFR and KRAS and so on, we began those testings in Alberta, coordinated testing for patients in southern Alberta, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and really helped bring precision medicine to the people in Alberta and Western Canada. So that was an exciting journey. We also had a pharmacokinetic facility there where we could adjust chemotherapy dose levels to avoid toxicity and so on. So that ran out of the Tom Baker as well. So after that brought us to about 2011. And then I was recruited by the Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida. So I had a great opportunity to lead the department at Moffitt. So Moffitt is one of the top 10 cancer centers in America, huge. They were really focusing on precision medicine, very exciting opportunity. So I joined Moffitt in the role of department chair. So I oversaw the recruitment of new faculty and also had the role of building out their molecular lab. So I was director of esoteric lab services. So brought in next generation sequencing, liquid biopsy, and so on to Moffitt. Also contained a very busy research role. So I was medical director of the tissue core there. That's huge. They have over 30 staff, ran over 500 clinical trials, and one of the largest facilities in the US with over 500,000 patients that they monitor for blood and specimens and so on. So that was an incredible experience.
Wow, yeah.
And then also ran my own research lab where I studied breast and ovarian cancer and mechanisms in promoting progression. I also even had some unusual research. I started some work on training dogs how to detect cancer from urine and so on. So there was a donor who was quite interested in how dogs might be able to detect cancer. And it turns out that people who have cancer emit volatile signatures that dogs can smell. And we're starting to learn how can we do that with artificial noses and looking at gas analysis. So we're actually working with a company that's developed a test that looks at a balloon. You take a balloon sample of breath, can analyze it for markers that predict an underlying colon cancer. So we're looking at potentially bringing that through the FDA. So some very interesting things there. While I was at Moffitt, I became aware of the gaps in cancer care, the problems in diagnostics and getting people onto treatment and integrating the data, particularly outside of large centers like Moffitt, where in America, 80% of patients are treated in community centers where they may only have an isolated oncologist or very small teams, and felt there's a large unmet need. And I founded Protean 2017 to really address that. So our vision is to bring the latest advances in cancer diagnostics, make them easily available to patients and doctors in a very easy to access system. So our system at Protean, we built on something we call MAPS. It's a platform where it's designed to be easily accessible, so a doctor can easily enroll a patient. They can transmit the medical information in a safe way. We can work with that medical team, review it all, determine if new testing is required, analyze the existing testing, look at all of the data, put it together, make a treatment recommendation. Quite often we find that in patients coming in, there may be errors in diagnosis, that the wrong test was done or a test wasn't done or was interpreted incorrectly. Just recently I saw an unfortunate lady who had a diagnosis of triple-negative breast cancer, but on review it turned out that it was actually had markers of HER2 and ER, estrogen receptor, but it was too late for her because it took too long to get that review done, and unfortunately she passed away. But having that review earlier might have been able to change the course of her treatment and so on. So having correct second opinions, expert reviews can really change the course of treatment for a patient. And this is why patient empowerment is important. Patients can take control of their own disease course by getting information, talking to other experts, getting second opinions, perhaps getting additional testing that may not be readily available. It can make a huge impact, can really change and they could go into a long-term remission or even cures if they get the right information at the right time.
And that is not what's happening for pretty much anybody right now, is it?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. In fact, studies are showing that disparities, fragmented care, and lack of access are some of the biggest problems affecting cancer in the US and globally. I know the problem's just the same in Canada. Problem is there's a lack of resources, so the system tries to do the best it can, but unfortunately it's quite fragmented, and our current electronic systems are not designed to share information, and the pace of change is so fast that the older systems can't keep up. So, for example, when I was a resident, there'd be 1 or 2 new diagnostics and treatments every 2 or 3 years. Last year, there was almost 170 new treatments and diagnostics. Nobody can keep up with that. We can, we try to, because that's our job, so we keep up with that, try to make those tests available, easily accessible. What we don't do in our own lab, we have partner labs that can do it, but we coordinate it all. So when a client comes to us, we can organize the review, collect their data, perform additional testing if needed, if indicated. If we need some unusual testing, we can contract with another lab, pull all the data together, integrate it, and really guide a patient or a medical team as to what to do next. We use the latest. We have AI tools for treatment matching. We have access to clinical trials. We can find the best available treatment. So we use guideline-based care first. We look at FDA approved. And then if we go beyond that, we're starting to look at off-label. We're looking at clinical trials. And then we're looking at AI. Can we sift through this and come up with a very personalized, novel treatment for a patient to really get the best outcome? I've seen over 500 patients in the last year or two, so we're quite busy working with that. In many cases, I think we've made a significant difference. I've had, for example, a young man from Australia that they had really given up hope on him, that he was in hospice with a metastatic seminoma that had changed into sarcoma. We were able to test him and find there was a trial for him. They were able to open it and he went into full remission. 4 years later, he's still cancer-free. Wow. He was able to go back to college. We've seen other cases where people were going to undergo treatment. For example, a person was going to have a liver transplant. We reviewed it and determined they actually didn't even have cancer. We were able to avoid having all of that unnecessary surgery, and he was able to keep his liver. So having proper reviews both ways, whether you have cancer, do you really have cancer, what kind of cancer do you have, might you actually have a benign condition, or so on. So that's so critical, putting the information together and guiding the team. We're not here to replace the team. We're here to supplement them. We're here to advise them. We have a full telemedicine system. We very much respect the patient and their care team. However, if a patient feels their care team is lacking, we can help them find a new one. But generally, we work with their existing one and try to bring them up to date, because they may not even know their new testing, their new technologies, their new treatments. We're a resource to work with them in a partnership to really bring them the latest and some potentially very, very innovative technologies.
Yeah, sounds like. Yeah. This issue of what is offered as a rule to most patients versus what is possible, the chasm between the two, that's what you're here obviously to help solve.
Right. Yeah, so there's two problems. So one is standard care, which is pretty good. So if a patient, these are the guideline-based cares, that only works if they've actually even done standard care, meaning they've got the correct diagnosis and they've done the standard treatments and selection. And shockingly, in America, there's a study looking at lung cancer with just standard diagnostics and treatment where every patient should have an EGFR mutation test. And it was found that less than half of them actually had that standard covered test they didn't get it, and they didn't get the right treatment. This is standard. So even getting standard treatment, there's huge gaps. Never mind going beyond, say, wow, there are all of these innovative treatments. Now, there are barriers to that, saying that, centers may not be able to afford that, or they're not offering them. This is where patient empowerment comes in and say, wow, I could find another center that could do this, or I could do the test in my own hands. Like, for example, I'm dealing with a patient in Calgary who has a head and neck cancer, and they told me that they don't routinely do the molecular testing, so they can't match them to a therapy. However, if the patient did their own testing and found something, they could, but they're not allowed to do the testing on the public system. So sometimes a patient could take matters into their own hands, arrange for that testing. Now they have to say, hey, look, I've got this. Now the oncologist can take action. So, well, now that you have that, you actually qualify for this clinical trial that we have open. We can get you on it. So the testing is very, very important. Often it's forgotten about. The treatments can be quite expensive, but often they're covered by the government or by the pharma. The testing may not be. The testing is where you can really make a difference. And so, because if you don't have the test, you don't know the right therapy, and nobody's going to give it. But if you have that test and say, now I've sifted through 200 therapies, I know the 3 that are the ones that could work. Now you've got a case to say, I need that drug. People will listen to you because you've actually got that.
Yes, it's easier to get a doctor on board with a prescription. It's easier to get some coverage. It's easier to get into a clinical trial or whatever it is. But it's true. Patients, essentially what you're saying, I think, is there's a lot more that can be done for cancer patients than is currently done in most facilities, even the best facilities.
Yes, I'd say that only 20% of what can be done is being done. It's like that 20-80 rule. So they're really doing the minimum. It's not because, it's because it's overwhelming. Cancer is an overwhelming problem. The system's overloaded. There's, particularly in Canada, there's so many new population. The system hasn't been expanded. There's a lack of capability. We know in British Columbia that the BC Cancer Agency has to send patients to Washington for treatment because their facilities are overloaded.
Even for radiation, like basic therapies.
Basic standard therapies. The system's overloaded, and certainly getting these innovative therapies, they just don't have the capacity for that.
And they're not doing the testing.
And they're not doing the testing. They don't have the facilities. And in fact, sometimes they don't want to because we don't want to do this because now we're going to have to do this expensive therapy and all of these things. So there's many barriers that are systematic. However, a patient can overcome those. The system's not going to necessarily help you, but you can help yourself. And I found that patients that do the best are ones that have a partner that can really guide them through. At Protean, we're the partner. We can help, and also with your organization, you can help really guide a patient and their family. What are the choices? What can I do? And even if that doesn't work, at least you have peace of mind that you've covered all your bases and that you really know what's going on and that you understand what's happening.
As with what we discover when patients come to us for additional testing and navigation, it's exceptionally rare there isn't something better.
It's almost 100%.
It's almost
almost 100%. You will find something.
Yes.
Because there are so many, and like I say, there's probably 200 or more therapies. They're only considering 4 or 5 with standard, and they're just using like standard chemo or other things. Whereas if you get a targeted therapy, almost every tumor has a targeted therapy. You just have to look for it. It's like it's a bit like a needle in the haystack, but our new technology actually looks at every haystack and determines everything, is it a straw or a needle, and actually will find that needle. So it's not the technologies with NGS and comprehensive and ultra rapid detection actually blow away the haystack and you find the needles. So that's the whole idea of what we're doing.
And what you were showing me earlier in our lab tour about some of the technologies that take just a couple of hours.
Yes, ultra rapid. Like, first of all, like I say, you got to have that review. So, because we don't want to do things that are unnecessary or duplicate things. And, a lot of the time there's stuff missed. Because I saw a patient from Australia who had what was called a Caris test. And so the test was done, but the physicians there weren't able to interpret it.
Right.
And they said, this doesn't really show anything. So I helped them interpret it and say, look, this test actually surfaced these 3 things. They said, oh, I didn't know that's what that meant.
Right.
So once that was pointed out, they said, oh, I've got a trial for this patient. She was able to go on to that trial and went into a remission. So sometimes the doctors, the tests are too complicated even for the doctors to fully understand, and we can help them understand. So step 1, what's been done already? Has it been interpreted already? Likewise, I had that patient last week that they did the right test, but they didn't actually read the result correctly, and they made a misinterpretation. So doing those things can make a real difference. So getting the right, if you're going to build a house, you need the right blueprints. You want to make sure everything's there. If you're building the wrong house, you're not going to get the right outcomes.
Well, this is what shocks me so much. The more I learn and the more I see as a patient navigator about what's being done versus what's possible, I just don't. I do understand that it's just the nature of the evolution of what's possible and how slow these systems work. I do intellectually, I understand, and at the same time, I'm kind of gobsmacked that diagnostics isn't more urgent. It's not more important. Because if you're a doctor treating somebody, why would you not want to make sure that you are using the most accurate diagnosis and that you understand how to analyze the data, or that you have someone like yourself or like Alex, analyzing that data and making sure it's being properly utilized. It seems like a no-brainer to me that's where the system should be pivoting.
Agreed, 100%. And part of it is some of the doctors haven't been educated in genetics and other things, and so I can't understand that. I would never learn. I don't know what a DNA is or how all these things. So there's a barrier there, and they say, well, I've done this way forever, and it works. I don't really want to change it, and then some of the systems don't make those technologies available. And I think in some ways it's a failure of pathology. I actually blame pathology in that pathologists haven't been vocal enough about the value of this discipline in medicine that's so fundamental to the practice of medicine. So there's a famous pathologist, Sir William Osler, who's actually Canadian, said that medicine is only as good as pathology, and that pathology is the foundation to medicine. So that pathology is really where it all begins. That's where the diagnosis begins and so on. And often pathology is regulated to the basement or to a lab across town or to a lab in California, and doctors forget about it, how important it is. And pathologists are doctors, they're experts, they're colleagues, they can help solve problems. They understand these diseases at a fundamental level and can be part of the medical team. In fact, it's said the pathologist is the most important member of your medical team that you've never heard of.
Right.
And you don't even know who your pathologist is. Like, did you get a good pathologist that day when your specimen went through, or did you get someone who was half asleep, or someone that wasn't trained in that? That's a real problem. That's a crapshoot. You don't know who you're getting. So, and then pathology, it's advanced so quickly. Pathology contributes about 80% of the information to the medical records. So important. Forgotten about it. Data's lost. We're throwing away most of the data from pathology labs every single day. My mission is to bring pathology back into the spotlight, into its position to really be an important member of the medical team and to really impact patient care. And it kind of surprised me when I started to get interested in it when I was first a pathologist, like in Saskatchewan. Patients started calling me and said, I saw your name on the report and I don't know what it means. So come and visit me. So I actually brought them into my office and showed them this. I said, oh, that's what my cancer looks like? I had no idea. Or I had one that had a misdiagnosis, and I walked her through it and explained everything that went wrong. Goes, oh wow, this is amazing. I want to give a donation to help research in this area so that this doesn't happen in the future. So I really became engaged, saying, wow, patients need to understand what pathology is and how important it is in their care, that we're part of the team. We really work with the other team members and can really make a big difference. The other thing I was going to point out is actually on the clinical trials, only 3 or 4% of people get onto them, and many trials close because of lack of recruitment. And so there's a big barrier there if we could get more people on trials. And the problem's even worse for people who are in rural areas or disparities, African Americans, Latinos, in Canada probably First Nations people or people in rural communities. Huge problem. And we've got very inequitable healthcare, extremely inequitable. because part of it is not only where you live or what money you have, but what you know. So that drives it as well. Like, you can empower yourself with knowledge and get better treatment, get better options as well. So,
what are your thoughts, if you're comfortable offering them, about the fact that oncologists don't tell patients that these diagnostics exist? Like, they're part of it is their education, but like, what are the barriers to doctors just saying, hey, sadly, my facility cannot provide you the most thorough diagnosis. Go here, get that, and come on back with the data.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Well, there's a couple of issues. One is the oncologists are often uncomfortable with the testing. They don't fully understand it. Some of them, I've had patients who have been suggesting liquid biopsies on, say their oncologist says, I wouldn't even know what to do with the data. So that's kind of alarming. Like, this is a technology that's been around 20 years.
Life-saving.
Absolutely. And then there's a concern, well, what if they find a treatment, we don't offer it here? Now what are we going to do? So there's so many barriers to that an oncologist is going to try to discourage it, because it's going to give them a headache.
That's
so,
right.
Like, I've got 40 other patients. Now I've got this one that's sort of acting up. How am I going to manage this?
You've got hundreds of patients.
Exactly. Typical oncologists will see 200 new patients a year, plus their ongoing patients that could be hundreds and hundreds, thousands in fact. So the oncologist simply doesn't have the effort, the energy, the capability, or the time to really focus on precision medicine. And that's lacking in the system. Our system is moving from one size fits all, like a cookie cutter, and oncologists could do 200 patients like that. Now, when it's every patient is a unique patient, it's like the system is unwinding, and it's creating a real problem.
Yeah, and again, as we were just saying, it's leading oncologists to just not even shine a light on something that patients themselves could do, because as you're saying, patients can take it upon themselves to call yourself or call CTOM and get some testing, have a far more thorough diagnosis, have advocates then help educate the doctors on what to do with that data. But the doctors aren't even telling them. I've had many conversations with doctors who have said, well, I just don't think Mrs. Smith could afford anything. And they're making the decision for themselves, for Mrs. Smith.
They have no idea whether Mrs. Smith can afford it or not, or wants to do it. And this is an important thing. The system is flawed in that we don't have proper educational platform. And that's one of the things we're trying to build at Protean, is actually a platform that any doctor can plug into, will guide them. These are the tests that are indicated. If they need support, we can communicate with them and explain why and help them so they don't feel abandoned dealing with the test. That we're like their virtual colleague, saying, okay, I can call on you to help me guide this patient through. Now I feel confident you're actually using proper guideline, proper science, proper ethics, properly taking care of these patients, best available care. We need to build that trust with the patient and the doctors, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move medicine forward, move it forward from general one-size-fits-all, precision medicine, personalized for each individual. Every patient's a unique individual. They need to be matched to the right therapy for them. Needs to be tailored, needs to be adjusted, needs to be adjusted so they don't have toxicity, so they have efficacy. And if it stops working, so it's discontinued, so that they don't continue to have unnecessary toxicity. That's the future of medicine.
It's here.
It's here.
It's possible.
It's happening today and now. Our challenge is to make it more and more available to everybody. That's our goal.
And you mentioned in our chat earlier about the shortage of pathologists.
Yes.
There's quite a lack.
Just I found this surprising myself. Most of the pathologists in the world are in the U.S., but there's actually only about half as many as there were 10 years ago. Pathology is somewhat of a dying specialty, and it's becoming more and more important. So the demands on a pathologist are actually almost 10 times more than they were 10 years ago to make the diagnosis, select the right stains, select the right tests, interpret them. So it's a huge problem. I was kind of shocked. One of my daughters is in medical school, and she was telling me, one of her friends is interested in going into pathology, and he went to his advisor. He said, nobody's ever wanted to go into pathology. We don't even know how to advise you. So they reached out to me to advise him. And this is shocking. In every med school class, we should have 2 or 3 pathologists coming out to hear that they haven't had a pathologist in years is terrible. Every med school class should have 2 or 3 pathologists as part of that class, and they become colleagues. And
even more so now as what we're discussing is
Yes.
unfolding. The evolution of cancer care requires
Absolutely.
people like yourself who really understand pathology and diagnostics.
Yeah, exactly. So pathologists are lab experts. We're doctors. We're trained as doctors. I was trained as somewhat of a family doctor, how to look and talk to a patient, but also in the science of medicine, how do we work together? And then I had the privilege to work with all types of surgeons and oncologists, understand what their needs are and how to give them the information they need to take best care of their patient. We need more people that are in that. At Moffitt, we're lucky to create a precision medicine fellowship program. Love to see that expanded and have more people trained in precision medicine. There are many different trainees went through that, not just pathologists, but oncologists, surgeons, also doctors of pharmacy and other scientists. So that program really integrates. It's a new discipline, precision medicine, integrated care. We really need to take, cancer's a multifaceted problem. We need a multifaceted, multidisciplinary team to solve it, but they all act on the data. Data all comes from pathology and radiology. That's where the data is.
You're at the heart of it all.
We're the heart of it all. We're the nerve center of everything, and that's what I find exciting. That we're the first to know. We can guide. First to see innovative technologies at Protean here. We see emerging companies coming out with innovative ways to more quickly and cheaply analyze tumors. We get to analyze those, look at them in the research side, decide what we can move into clinical, quickly do that, make that available to our clients. Sometimes we can offer research grade testing to our clients under a research study. They can sign on to that, and we can look at what that might guide as well. So we have lots of opportunities to work with people.
You do, in a wonderful space.
Well,
I know your time is tight. I have a couple more questions.
Sure,
could I?
please. Yeah, of course.
I guess in wrapping up, if there was something you could say to all oncologists, if there was something you could offer them, what would that be?
Well, first of all, get to know your pathologist.
Okay.
Yeah, your pathologist, you're only as good an oncologist as you are your pathology is, because if your pathologist has made errors or gaps, you're already behind the 8 ball when you're treating with the patient. So obviously building that rapport with a pathologist, and then also learning more about precision pathology and diagnostics, and what are the latest diagnostics, what's changing, and how can you incorporate those into your practice. Not all pathologists will be up to speed on those, so really finding the pathologists that are offering the molecular pathologists, because molecular pathology is what's really impacting cancer care. So not all pathologists understand molecular pathology. So I'd advise the oncologist, first of all, you want to know your pathologist. Is the diagnosis correct and complete? Who is my molecular pathologist? Did I do the right test? Was it interpreted correctly? And how does that guide therapy? And also what other tests could be available, liquid biopsies, ex vivo analysis, genetics, and so on. So really pulling the diagnostics into your care team and really sort of figuring out how to connect with them in an efficient way. So really, it's all about communication, about teamwork, about really building that team. And for too long, pathologists have been isolated in the basement with reading slides. Pathology is much more than reading slides. It's an active living specialty that's really fundamental to the care of patients, and particularly in precision medicine.
Yeah, increasingly so. Yeah. And one last question.
Sure.
The same again for patients. What would you most want somebody who's just got a cancer diagnosis, or maybe even thinking that something fishy's going on and they don't want to do the watch and wait thing? What would you suggest?
Again, I say know your pathologist. The pathologist is the most important member of your team. You find out who your pathologist is. You could talk to them or get another pathologist like myself to do a review, and I can say, yes, everything is fine, or wow, there's a gap here, we really need to look at this and do some additional work, or there's an outright error here, we really need to fix this. So getting to know your pathologist, perhaps getting a second opinion. If you're going to renovate your kitchen, you're going to get 3 people to come in and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, this is what it's going to cost, this is how long it's going to take, and you're going to consider them all and say, okay, when you're going to embark on a life-changing, life-altering therapy, don't you think you should get a second opinion or a third opinion? I would. So it's I think that makes sense in terms of
So too.
not only confidence and also making sure you're not missing anything. I think it's just prudent.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a perfect point to wrap up there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this an incredibly beneficial use of your time. Tony's such a dear fellow, so incredibly knowledgeable. And as you can tell, if you've watched any of my videos, through his own experience as a pathologist, he's come to the same conclusions that I have about what's missing in our cancer care system and what can be done to enhance it. We are working towards the same end, which is providing cancer patients the most thorough and accurate diagnosis and some access to the most effective therapies. So please reach out to me and my team if we can be of assistance in this regard. We'll be happy to connect you with Tony and make sure that the most effective tests and treatments are applied to your care as soon as possible.